chance. No, if I can do this, well,
To move on and be who I am.
bet on it, bet on it, bet on it, bet on you can. Bet on it, bet on it, bet on it, bet on it. Every day of our lives, wanna find you there. On what? All for what?
Hello Internet, I'm the Disney Brain and welcome to the DCOM review. With the most popular Disney Channel sequel of all time nearing a decade in age, it seems like as good a time as any to take a close look at it. And with this, we'll focus on the nature of a sequel as well as how the film functions on its own terms. Spoiler warning now, not that there's anyone here who hasn't seen this movie, so with all that said, let's get our heads back in the game as we discuss High School Musical 2. We start things off at the tail end of the school year, with summer right around the corner, and no better way to ring in the closing bell than with a musical number. Once again, we see director and choreographer Kenny Ortega's mastery of space. He knows that everyone is leaving class, so he sets up dancing that's constantly moving forward and is never in one place for long until the number ends. Great attention to detail, and we're off to a good start. Unfortunately, Miss Darbus won't have any more screen time in this one. So, the Wildcats are looking for summer jobs in between their junior and senior years of high school, but they're having a bit of trouble. Thankfully for Troy and the gang, Sharpay hasn't changed a bit, and in the process of trying to hire just Troy, basically every noteworthy major and minor character gets a job at Lava Springs, which the Evans family just so happens to own. This leads to one of my least favorite songs from any of the three films, but that's not to say that Fabulous doesn't have its place in the movie. It really is the perfect song for Sharpay as a character, but I'm just not the biggest fan of emphasizing this particular aspect of her personality. In any case, now is as good a time as any to introduce Markel Taylor, who plays Mr. Fulton and does pretty well filling into the Miss Darbus role of captivating older supporting character, and the lines they give him are great and fit well with the character he's portraying. So everybody's stuck in seemingly unideal jobs, meaning it's time to sing about it. Work This Out is a really fun song. Not as much space for choreography, but it gets the job done. So a big part of this film is Troy and Gabriella trying and often failing to spend quality time together in the aftermath of becoming an item in the first film. And, since Sharpay still wants to get with Troy, Gabriella often gets the stern talking to, while Troy keeps getting promoted. But before that plot point comes to a head, we get a brand new song from Kelsey. Now, this is a minor detail, but I think it's really worth mentioning. I have spoken highly of the fact that Troy has his own solo song in every film, but I think these movies also do a really good job to this point of creating a consistent tone in the music Kelsey specifically is creating. You're the Music in Me, Breaking Free before that, and What I've Been Looking For, you can tell that they all come from the same place. In any case, this song convinces Troy and the others that they should go for the employee talent show. This, of course, doesn't bode well for Sharpay and her meddling, so she decides to slowly and methodically pry Troy away from his friends through that series of promotions I touched on earlier, which first takes the form of acquiring Troy and Chad to caddy for her parents. This leads to Troy getting invited to a fancy dinner with the Evans family, and Mr. Evans just so happens to have a ton of pull at the University of Albuquerque, which is hilarious since this movie is filmed in Utah, but minor details. And that just so happens to be the school that Troy wants to play basketball for. So Troy getting pulled and pushed every which way naturally leads to him being late for a date with Gabriella, who, to her credit, remains extremely patient through most of Troy's antics here. And then, yeah, it's a... well, as you can see, moving on. So Troy finally shows up to his date and Gabriella gets busted again, despite Troy's constant pleas that it was his fault. And what does he get for accepting blame? Why, another status upgrade, of course. But before that, we get a nice moment between him and good old Coach Bolton, emphasizing the importance of scholarships and opportunities. So Troy now gets promoted to golf instructor with new clothes, a bigger paycheck, and his own golf cart, thus allowing him to slip further and further into the dark side, or in this case, the pink side? The others figure Sharpay is up to no good. In fact, they pretty much know that much, but they decide to just abandon those thoughts. Troy then meets up with some of the U of A basketball players and then starts turning into a bona fide jerk, which is not a transformation I'm buying for a second, but more on that later. So Sharpay continues her sociopathic tirade by stealing Kelsey's latest song, while Troy skips out on his team and Gabriella again to hang out with the Red Hawks basketball team. The real Troy would have asked many moons ago if some of his guys could tag along, but I guess we're not dealing with the real Troy anymore. And as heartbreaking as it is to see the captain essentially abandon ship, it gets better in a hurry as we get Lucas Grabeel and Baseball. I Don't Dance has got to be one of the best songs of the entire franchise, and it's a great piece of musical development for Ryan. As Ryan expresses, a lot of people only saw him as Sharpay's undignified sidekick, but by choosing the Wildcats over the idea of acquiescing to another Sharpay scheme, he really grows in this movie, maybe more so than any other character. And is it wrong that for a second there I kind of thought, hey, wouldn't these two be nice together? Oh, no, nope, hold that thought, nope, not going down that road, and we're moving on. So the whole Troy versus everyone confrontation comes to a head with Chad challenging him in the aftermath of all the group activities he's missed. It really is a potent acting moment for both parties, and I liked how they made Troy frantically explain his reasoning. It does better than the whole Swiss cheese mix-up at selling his transformation. Afterwards, everyone is practicing for their own upcoming performance, with Ryan being the one to lead the Wildcats with no Troy on hand. Sharpay obviously doesn't like the fact that her brother is betraying her, despite the fact that she betrayed him first, because sociopath, but anyways. She convinces Mr. Fulton to cancel junior employee participation in the upcoming talent show, which also serves as a great bit of acting, once again, from Markel Taylor. So far in this sequel, Gabriella has been doing her normal thing where she's relatively soft-spoken, very patient, and doesn't really move the plot forward, but man, do I love this scene. She chews out Sharpay in such a beautiful way, not just making it very clear that she's not okay with the game she's playing, but that no guy is worth playing these games for. I like this scene that much more because a lot of the first movie was happenstantial in the way Troy and Gabriella met, interacted, and eventually got together. The original is kind of a fairy tale on that level, but Gabriella finally stands up and says enough is enough to both Sharpay and Troy. God, I love this girl. Anyways, this leads to Gotta Go My Own Way, which is a fine song, but isn't all that necessary strictly speaking. We already know how all parties are feeling right now, and I think that it would have made for a more intimate and powerful movie moment to just let Gabriella walk off musicless and let the emotional acting that Zach does very effectively take over from there. But I guess it's still a musical at the end of the day, so not really the biggest of issues. Then, Troy learns about the whole employee talent show situation and decides it's time to do something, namely, sing about it. I don't think that Bet On It fits into the narrative as well as Get Your Head in the Game did, nor do I think Zach's prancing around the golf course is at all better choreography, but I do like the song itself better, which is kind of a running theme for this sequel. And if nothing else, it does get at the heart of Troy's complications, though not nearly as well as Scream would in the next movie. So after that dramatic performance, Troy decides to do something not very dramatic and take his old kitchen job back, therefore disqualifying him from talent show participation. This doesn't go over well with Sharpay, but she's kind of run out of moves to make at this point. But Troy ends up saving her after some convincing from the recently converted Ryan, and pulls one of the best switcheroos I've ever seen. To steal a phrase, that's showbiz. And then, we get the penultimate song of the movie in Every Day, a powerful way to cap off the arcs of both Troy and Ryan here, while also giving all the other characters a role to play. But it does just kind of function like the last two songs from the first movie mixed together, so I don't think it adds anything narratively, just a nice conclusion. Or at least it would have been, but unfortunately they also wanted a second big finish, so they tacked on All for One, which screams discount all in this together from the opening note. It's not the worst thing in the world, since this movie is partly about summer fun, but it's just so unneeded because the movie should have ended after that big kiss and fade out. But either way, let's get to the characters. Oh look, it's Miley Cyrus. We know pretty much all the supporting characters from the first movie, and most of them that have something to do here are basically doing the same old thing. Even Jason is sucking up again at the beginning. This also impacts some of the more major characters like Taylor and Kelsey, but especially Taylor, who has less to do in this movie than Keely Williams in the first two Cheetah Girls flicks, and doesn't even have the chance to embrace that signature intelligence from the first movie. Kelsey is doing her normal music thing, but unlike the original, which progressed her character as a smart parallel to Troy, her character doesn't have anywhere to go here, so she's just kinda there. Chad does get a few good scenes though, and what more can I say about I Don't Dance? Just a great musical number. I think his acting is a little more layered here because his character had to react to an ever-changing Troy, and I think that worked. But I also think it works even better in the third movie. Markel Taylor, however, steals the show as the clear best new character in the franchise and one of the better supporting characters in any DCOM. His lines are very well written while not straying too far away from the overall tone of the film. Every scene is another highlight, and whatever they paid him to be in this movie, they didn't pay him nearly enough. But this entire movie is controlled by the quartet of main characters all in different ways. Let's start with the goddess herself. Vanessa Hudgens brings a lot more nuance, power, toughness, and layers to the character of Gabriella. In the first movie, she was amazing, of course, but didn't really have a whole lot to do because her character isn't a very aggressive person, so she's not impacting the plot that much. But here, we get to see a lot more sides of her, in addition to witnessing what her breaking point is, even though she forgives and forgets fairly quickly. It was a nice touch to give her not just several moments to impact the plot with her overwhelming charm, but also give her the chance to express herself both subtly and intensely before eventually breaking into song. All in all, a really good performance. Troy Bolton was the best part of the first movie. I've pretty much stressed that point to death over several videos now. Here, he's not as good, but he still has all the elements of the strong character he was just a movie ago. But I think the main thing here is that his character is a lot less subtle. Most of his changes and developments are expressed through external dialogue and not as much through expressions or actions. Sometimes that works in the film's favor, but other times it's just a bit too much. and it would have made for a more convincing change if a lot of Troy's choices were as downplayed as they were in the first and the third movie. There was a ton crammed into this movie for Troy to deal with, because this film is a lot less straightforward than the first, but all in all, I think it made a genuinely great character look a little less great, to say nothing of his conflict with the other Wildcats. Sharpay is nuts, but actually, in the first movie, she was portrayed as very control-oriented, yes, but I think this film may have taken things a bit too far. Trying to save the musical, as she puts it, is one thing, but using everyone and everything you have power over to bend other people to your will is kind of psychotic. And what's worse is that she's developing backwards from her resolution in the last movie. They gave her a clean finish where she could sing and dance along with the rest of her classmates, and even teases a scenario where she finally notices Zeke, but none of that seems to matter now. Now, don't get me wrong, Ashley Tisdale still owns this role, and few could play it better, but the fault here lies more with the way the movie is structured, which makes some sense since they did have to rush this into production after the first movie became a runaway success, and what we got from it was literally the same Sharpay, with the tricks and deceptions and manipulation, but with an added scoop of insanity. But on the plus side, Sharpay's actions gave way to a great character arc for Ryan Evans, where he really comes into his own after being relegated to the role of minor character in the first movie, despite being on the poster. His sister's actions finally drive him away once her obsession proves that family apparently doesn't come first, which is kind of weird because her parents don't really give off that vibe, but that potential backstory isn't given any focus here. In any case, Lucas Grabeel does well here to take action instead of just giving in to Sharpay. It was clear in a more downplayed way that he respected the stage and music way more than Sharpay did in the original film, and now he's given the opportunity to really involve himself in the story. It took the classic don't judge a book approach, and it allowed Ryan to convince the others that not only was he more than he appears, but that he could lead a great performance. And the best part is that they never once felt the need to make him look stupid just for a quick and easy joke. He was a real person here, and maybe the single best character in this movie. Lucas was the king twice in 2007. He helped the Green Team make history, and he won over all of East High. And that's High School Musical 2. So, what's the verdict? It's a pretty good sequel, but just like the Cheetah sequel and the Camp Rock sequel, it doesn't capture the same essence or understanding of the original film. But in all three cases, the sequels do some things better than the originals as well. In the case of High School Musical, I think the soundtrack is stronger overall, even though I'd say the original has higher peaks. But the main thing here is that this movie is relatively scattershot plot-wise. There's a lot of stuff happening in this movie, and you've got 3, 4, maybe 5 plot lines moving all over the place. The pace isn't really a problem, but because this movie, as I mentioned, isn't as linear as its predecessor, you get a lot of scenes that don't really matter all that much. Some of that is purposeful, because Sharpay is actively trying to sabotage Troy and Gabriella, but it really feels like some moments needed more space and other moments maybe should have been cut out completely. But what this movie does have going for it is 2 better performances from Lucas and Vanessa here. They have a lot more to say with regards to how their characters impact the plot, and both actors made the most of that chance. You guys already know what I think about all of this nonsense, but hear me out on this one. I think we might have had an even better movie if Gabriella and Ryan got more chances to interact, not as potential partners necessarily, but as 2 people engaged in a blooming friendship. That does sound very fan-servicey, but hold on, I've got a reason for it too. It would have created a great parallel that would have essentially countered Sharpay's sociopathic attempts to court Troy. Sharpay and Troy are together a lot in this movie because of force, but then Ryan and Gabriella get to know each other better by chance and then actually want to spend time together. It would have been a living example of the expression you can't force a connection, but also create a situation where the 2 best characters from this movie could develop together without needing to enter a relationship afterwards. Some of this probably happened off screen, as is hinted at, but I think it really should have been on screen, especially if it took the place of whatever this is. At the core of this movie is the idea of the future and seizing opportunity, but a lot of that feels like unresolved setup since they handle those same topics in a much better and more complete way in the third film. Because this movie is a little bit of everything, there's not as much space to make that take-home message resonate as much as the take-home message of embracing novel sides of you from the first movie. It still kind of, sort of works sometimes, but I just didn't buy Troy's initial transformation. This movie basically told us if you go after scholarships or opportunities, you'll become a jerk out of nowhere and then become a bigger jerk later on, and that's just not true at all. And it especially doesn't fit with Troy's character, who barely pauses for a moment of clarity when all of these novel chances are being thrown his way. A lot of people would react to this newfound success like he did, but I don't think it's as believable with Troy, based on who he proves to be over the course of this franchise. As I mentioned, the third movie does address these points much better, but that doesn't absolve this film from not having the best understanding of them. It tries to balance being a fun summer musical with being an important next step for our characters, but I don't think it balanced those aspects as well as it could. I do like that they tried to go for that duality, but just like in another musical sequel, the execution was a little off in some areas. All in all, High School Musical 2 is a fun movie. It does miss a few chances to be even better, and some of the character work should have been maybe proofread a bit better, but considering how quickly Kenny Ortega and the cast had to turn around and make the second film, it works much better than expected. But I do think this movie could have been cleaner and overall better if they had taken a bit more time in between sequels, so I can't just overlook that timeline either. If their intention was to set things up for the final chapter, or at least what we thought was the final chapter, then there are many elements here, including a very clever one with Zac Efron literally screaming, that does well to set up senior year. So perhaps some of the fumbling this movie did with the important stuff was preordained by the writers so they could really handle that stuff well on the big screen. And since the third installment also came about a year after the second, I'd like to think that the third movie was planned at more or less the same time as this one, giving them a bit more time to flesh out certain ideas and make things larger scale with the added budget. But we'll talk more about High School Musical 3 in a future film review. High School Musical 2 isn't a perfect sequel by any means, but it's an enjoyable one. And if you liked or loved the first movie, there's certainly enough here for an entertaining hour and 46 minutes. Give it a watch, or in most cases a rewatch, and decide how good it is for yourself. And of course, thanks for watching.